is some dark side to what we're doing, but ultimately, at the end of the day, my goal is if this person who I am attempting to influence not to follow the company procedure and the policy, if I have to trigger them into a state of panic or fear that say they're going to lose their job or not get paid, or I have to push them to a point where they think that they're going to get a large bonus or an incentive, or like I essentially have to bribe them to do something, I feel like that's cheating, and it's a cheap tactic. And I'm better than that.
Welcome to the Hackers Cache, the show that decrypts the secrets of cybersecurity one byte at a time. My name is Kyser Clark, and today my guest is one of the most respected social engineers in the field and someone whose journey is just as jaw-dropping as her resume. Alethe Denis is a senior security consultant on the Red Team at Bishop Fox, where she pioneered the use of deepfakes in offensive engagements and built Red Team tabletop services from the ground up. She's a defconblackbadge Hall of Famer, keynote speaker, published author, and an InfoGrad member actively contributing to national infrastructure protection. Her path into hacking was anything but traditional, marked by resilience, reinvention, and relentless curiosity. Today, she blends technical expertise with deep psychological insights to help organizations face uncomfortable truths about human security. So, Alethe, thank you so much for being on the show. Go ahead and unpack some of your experience and introduce yourself to the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure. I would say I'm probably most well known for an episode of the Darknet Diaries, but the events that were in that episode happened about 6 years ago, and I would say it's probably the book end on the bookshelf that started this crazy journey, and not a lot has been said about what's happened since then. So I'm excited to talk about that stuff and kind of how things have evolved and changed in my career since then.
Yeah, so I mean that makes perfect sense. What has happened since that episode? Because that's where it introduced me to you as a fan of the Darknet Diaries episodes. That's when I first learned about you. So yeah, what has happened since that episode?
Yeah. Well, a lot of people have asked how to get into social engineering as a job. And what I found out very soon after winning the contest and being awarded the black badge is that social engineering isn't really a job, it's a skill that you can use in a variety of different jobs. So whereas I thought I'd be able to make the leap into information security and a role doing social engineering in a job pretty easily after that, it really took about 4 years before I found my way into a role doing predominantly social engineering work in the context of red team engagements. And now I'm a member of the Red Team at Bishop Fox, and I focus predominantly on social engineering activities in the context of red team assessments, where my job is to help further the red team's objectives within the engagement. So, doing red team activities and furthering our agenda using social engineering skills depending on what vectors are in scope for that engagement. So whether that's email phishing, phone calls, text messages, or sometimes, luckily enough, in-person or physical social engineering, which is probably my favorite and the one that people most often want to hear about is the physical engagements.
Yeah, that makes sense. The physical engagements, like I said, I'm a fan of the Dark Knight Diaries episode, and when you hear like them sneaking around the buildings, like it just
Yeah.
sounds so fun. I'm like, man, this is like an episode of James Bond or 007. So those are some pretty and he does a really good job at like telling a good story on that episode.
Right.
Like as a podcaster myself, I'm like, dude, how does he even tell this story? It's a great show, and it makes it sound like a movie. Honestly, like I was thinking, I was like, you see the cybersecurity headlines, and it's like a data breach, and it's like so boring to like read it. But then like he takes that and unpacks it so much and makes
Mm-hmm.
it a movie. It's such a great show. But yeah, I can understand why a lot of people like the physical stuff because I mean, from a someone who doesn't do a lot of social engineering, uh, that is seems a little more exciting. One thing that you said that caught my attention was you said social engineering isn't a job, it's a skill, and it took you a while to find a position that was predominantly social engineering. So why is it so hard to find a position that's predominantly social engineering? What do you think that is the case?
Well, a lot of the feedback that I received early on was that most organizations that were focused on offensive security testing were looking for people that were both very highly technically skilled in offensive security testing, so full scale pen testers, who had social engineering skills as well. And especially back then, I didn't have a ton of experience or much in the way of pen testing skills. And so a lot of people were pretty confused. They're like, how on earth did you win a black badge if you don't actually do this for a living? Like, are you the right person? Were a lot of the DMs I was getting on LinkedIn. Like, are you the actual right Alethe Denis who won the black badge? Because I'm looking at where you work and what you do, and that doesn't make sense right now. um, was what I was getting from, German CEOs in my inbox after the Der Spiegel article came out about the contest and winning the black badge and all that good stuff. But I think social engineering, it's a skill that goes beyond just what we think of technical skills wise. Like, can you send a phishing email? Is different from how to craft the most effective phishing email from a psychological and human behavior standpoint. So I like to think about social engineering more in the vein of behavioral engineering rather than simply, the crafting of a text message and sending it to try to influence somebody to take an action. Like, how do we craft a text message that will compel someone to actually take the action? And a lot of those skills I actually learned doing marketing and sales. And it's how to influence people to follow a call to action, how to influence people um, to essentially be triggered to make an emotional decision. And when you're dealing with highly technical skills, sometimes the development of those skills doesn't leave a lot of room for the development of interpersonal skills. And people who develop really great social skills sometimes don't have the opportunities to develop highly technical skills. And that's not a blanket statement or a stereotype. It's just something that I've seen with a lot of the people that I've met in the industry. A lot of the people who are very highly skilled on the social side may not have as many skills on the technical side, and vice versa. So I was one of those people that didn't have as many of the technical skills. And I don't know that you're going to find somebody that can do it all, but that I definitely could not. And so it was a struggle for me to find the first role, moving from a completely different industry into information security. But I found a consulting firm that was kind enough to let me transition my consulting experience in a different industry into information security. And I was doing essentially security risk and gap assessments with them for a couple of years before I was able to transition into the role with Bishop Fox that I'm in now. And over the last 3 years, I've grown pretty dramatically um, with my experience and the projects and assessments that I've been exposed to. And then just the team that I'm working with. They say you should never be the smartest person in the room. I feel like I've been precisely the dumbest person in the room for 3 years, and it's been fantastic. Like, and I mean that with you know, I mean that with humor, but also like completely with humility because I am surrounded by incredibly talented people and they absolutely push me to, you know, raise my own game pretty much every day. So it's been an incredibly humbling experience at times, but it's also pushed me to make myself better, which is exactly the kind of challenge that I need.
Yeah, I like how you said the smartest person in the room, dumbest person in the room. Like it's okay to be the dumbest person in the room because that's where the most room to grow because you can definitely grow. That's the fastest way to grow. And one of the signs of being stagnant in your career is when you become the smartest person in the room for a certain amount of time. Then that's like a sign that you're not growing.
Yeah.
So it's okay to not be the smartest person in the room. uh yeah, I don't think I've ever been either. And when I did like my last role in the military, like I felt like I knew it all, and at that point I was like, yeah, I'm gonna get out of the military and start pursuing some other things. And I was, that's a good sign of when to move on.
When I started at Bishop Fox, I'd never had any employee that I had targeted with a social engineering campaign over the phone tell me no. They'd always complied. Um, and I was typically doing, um, you know, whitelisted, whole organization style phishing campaigns for the types of email phishing campaigns that we were doing at my previous organization. So it kind of felt like I was clubbing baby seals. It just didn't feel natural or fair. And it didn't feel like it was really helping beyond reinforcing security awareness training. So it was a really huge learning curve for me when I started trying to approach projects as a social engineer, but in the style of a red team engagement where stealth is of the utmost importance. And there's a lot to consider as far as operational security is concerned. And, the approach is completely different.
Yeah, and yeah, I totally understand that. And that's one of the questions I'm going to ask you after we get past this. Well, it used to be called rapid fire questions, guys. The fans of the show, you already know the rapid fire questions, but we are now officially in season 2. So we're going to call them security Mad Libs now. So after security Mad Libs, we're going to unpack a little bit of that. We don't want to get too far into the show before we do security Mad Libs. So, Alethe, are you ready for security Mad Libs? You're the first one to do security Mad Libs.
Yep, as ready as I'll ever be. Let's do it.
Okay, so like I said, long-term listeners, it's very similar to the rapid fire questions, but instead of a question, it's just a fill in a blank question. It used to be 30 seconds. It is now 40 seconds to answer fill in the blank on 5 questions. If Alethe answers all 5 questions in 40 seconds, she'll get a bonus security Mad Lib that's unrelated to cybersecurity. So, Alethe, like I said, it's going to be just a fill in the blank. So, first thing comes to your mind, go as fast as you can. There's no wrong answers. And I will give you the opportunity to unpack your most interesting response after we get past this. So, here we
Okay,
go.
dangerous.
Alethe, if you could erase one cybersecurity term forever, it would be blank.
Military grade.
I knew I picked the right career when
I got to lie and get away with it.
a CISO's worst nightmare is
I'm sorry, could you repeat it?
a CISO's worst nightmare is
A breach.
when I hear someone say AI will replace hackers,
Cringe.
if I could red team any company on earth, it would be
Oh gosh. AT&T.
perfect. That's 34 seconds. So that is a good time. That's under 40. So congratulations. You have unlocked the bonus one. And the bonus Mad Lib, once we're done, you can explain it as much or as little as you want to. So are you ready for the bonus security Mad Lib?
Yes.
So here it is. If my pet could talk, it would probably say,
That he does not get to run around as often as he wants to. He's a very large dog.
nice. Yeah. Dogs, they like to run around. They
Yeah.
that's like their favorite thing to do. You see all the TikToks that are like when people just say the word walk, like their ears perk up and stuff. Like
Yeah.
dogs, like they know the words. Is that your only pet, the dog?
No, I have a German Shepherd, but I also have about 60-ish now chickens.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
You survived the eggflation pretty well,
Yes,
I'd
I
imagine.
did. They're the most, like, make no mistakes, those eggs are not free, but they're definitely there, which is great because I guess they were a little scarce there for a bit.
Yeah. For me, I have two cats, and they are big orange cats. If they
Oh,
could
nice.
talk, the one would say, "Dad, I want a treat." That's what he'd say. He always wants a treat, always. The other one would be like, "Dad, I need you to pet me right now,
Immediately. Right.
immediately." And that's kind of their personalities. Twin brothers,
Oh,
completely
that's
different
awesome.
personalities, which is
Yeah,
crazy. They've been together their whole lives, but yet they act completely
completely
different.
different. Yeah.
And that's
I
what's
I
really
miss
fun about it.
my cat. I had cats for a very long time, but we're like out in a rural area and there are many wild things out in the darkness, so I just felt like it wasn't a good idea to have another cat.
All right, so your most interesting response. I'm trying to figure out which one I like more. So, which one would you say for the cybersecurity term? If you could erase one cybersecurity term?
Oh, military grade.
Yeah. Why military grade? Why would you erase that?
Because I don't feel like any company that says that their product is military grade can really honestly say that, or that it actually means anything, because military grade isn't actually even military grade.
Yeah, so I am a military veteran. I'm a United States Air Force veteran, and when I and other veterans here, military grade, we just cringe. We cringe because the military really doesn't have the best stuff. It's not like the movies, man.
There's
You
not really
literally get
much
the cheapest of the
investment.
cheap.
Yep.
You get the lowest bidder when it comes to tools and stuff. Now, don't get me wrong, there has been a lot of innovation that's came out of the military. But I would say for everyday tasks, you're typically dealing with the bottom of the barrel. So when we hear military grade, we think of broken and not very good and cheap and
Outdated.
replaceable. And yeah, so I think that term needs to be erased everywhere, not just cybersecurity, because everyone's like, "Oh, military grade steel on my, I don't know, my hubcap on my car." I don't know. It feels like any kind of company uses it these days. Like, that's not what you think it means. Like, you're not impressing anybody, I don't think. Or maybe some people who just don't, who act, well, maybe they watch
Understand,
the movies like
right?
military
Yeah.
grade. Like, so yeah, I agree with you there, 100%. Okay, so like I said, we're gonna dive in a little bit deeper into your social engineering, and so you've said that the guilt from successful social engineering calls still keeps you up at night. How has that emotional residue shaped the way you scope engagements today? And do you think guilt is necessary trait in ethical hacking?
Yes. So I would say scoping of engagements, that has absolutely evolved since I first started doing this. For example, with the competition at DEF CON, there was a sense of like relishing the opportunity to do bad things and get away with it. Even and especially with an audience, there's just this like sense of drama that comes with being able to like perpetrate a crime and be rewarded and recognized for it. And I think that actually draws a lot of people into participating in those types of competitions. And I didn't realize how much the guilt would impact me. But after competing twice in a row, it was like, oh, this is actually something I'm going to like carry with me for a long time, because there's no way for me to like release myself of the guilt. I can't apologize to these people. I can't explain myself or like ask for forgiveness, because they're never going to know why this happened or allow me to explain to them what happened here, or even tell them that like nothing bad's going to happen and like assure them that everything's okay if they do get a weird feeling later. And so I can still see all their faces, I still remember all their stories, and it's still kind of messed up if you think about it. So when I started doing like social engineering assessments, I was always pretty careful to make sure that, I wasn't naming names in reports. And if somebody was the person who compromised the organization, they weren't, pointed out as the culprit and there weren't any like negative repercussions for them or anything like that. But as time went on, I started trying to shape the engagements to where we weren't targeting specific people. We were more targeting a department, a function in the business, or trying to get a more high level impact type outcome versus a security awareness training measure of competency or skill of employees to defend against social engineering attacks. And it's still something that I kind of struggle with, especially because we have clients who are bound by their own ethics and very strict corporate ethical policies for internal employee conduct. So they can't target specific groups within their own employee population. So they actually come to companies outside of their own and they bring in consultants to do red teams because they believe that we can operate in that gray and do the more realistic attack emulation. And so we have to explain things like, we can't call your employees' personal cell phones, despite the fact that they use their phones for work. If they own that number, we can't call it. If you own that number and it's an, company issued device, then sure, you can give us permission to call it, but otherwise no. And they're like, can't you just be real bad actors? Like, can't you just do this? And we're just like, no, actually, like, that's kind of outside of the scope of this thing, like ethically not good. And I think some folks don't want to accept that, or they find it frustrating that we can't because it doesn't simulate what they feel is like an authentic attack. So there are some frustrations on both sides. Like there's part of me that's like, that's not realistic. Like this should be a fully no knowledge test where we come in and we like actually do what a bad actor would do in this circumstance. But at the same time, like I don't think that it's fair for a test. And on the other hand, I feel like if we're fighting with both hands tied behind our backs, isn't it even more impressive if we're able to compromise the organization without using, fear-based or extortion type tactics or leveraging things that are ethically or even sort of in the gray area? So that's kind of how I look at it, I guess. Yes, it does keep me up at night. Now I'm very careful to scope things and be very transparent and upfront on the kickoff calls with clients about what we can and cannot do. And I think that helps to relieve some of the pressure and set the appropriate expectations with clients.
Yeah, that's really good. You mentioned that, and yeah, that's I imagine that's pretty hard. I don't do a lot of social engineering engagements. I've only actually done one, but as a pen tester, when I'm doing scoping for like network tests or web app tests, and like telling a client like, yeah, that that we can't do that, and then like disappointing them a little bit is never a good feeling, but it's like the right call to make. I guess my question for you is, so like with the employee cell phone, right? Like you said, it's ethically wrong and to call an employee's personally owned cell phone. Is there legal issues there, or is it just ethical?
Um, so it depends on the vector. For, say, a text message, it is illegal to text a number and send them an unsolicited message. Um, and that would be true if I were a car salesperson who was trying to advertise a car that I was selling on my lot. Like I couldn't send a text message to a customer, even if they were in my CRM, customer relationship management software, as a customer. I couldn't send them a text message unless they had opted in to receive that message. So that, yes, absolutely illegal. As far as the phone calls, it wouldn't necessarily be illegal for me to call their number, but if I were spoofing caller ID, that is illegal. So there's a new law that essentially makes it illegal to spoof caller ID. So I have essentially a very highly customized cloud-based PBX system that I developed over the last 5 or 6 years, 7 years. And that allows me to spoof caller ID in a way that is the most legal, put it that way. And then I have agreements with my vendors for and in place with the clients and Bishop Fox to make sure that everything is above board. But I don't feel comfortable assuming that consent from the client's employees for their personal numbers. So if I have consent from my upstream phone providers, like upstream carriers, and I have consent from Bishop Fox as my employer, and I have consent from the clients, then I think I'm good on all fronts. But because the employees aren't aware of the test, I feel like it would be ethically not okay for me to spoof a number and make those calls. And in most cases, I am spoofing a number. So that's kind of why I just rule the personal numbers out of scope, because from a legal perspective, it would be illegal. Um, just making a phone call to a personal number of a client's employees, that would be ethically out of scope, regardless, because that person can't consent to that call without knowing about it, and they own that phone number. That is their number. So just like we wouldn't email an employee's personal email account or email address during a phishing test, I don't think that we should target any of their other, personal social media, phone numbers, email addresses, any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's great, and that's good that you draw the line there because I agree with you. And yeah, thanks for unpacking that. And yeah, I can. There's a lot of gray area there, but it's good to see that you
I
have
think just erring on
your
the side of caution. I mean, I'm sure
yeah.
that there's some arguments that can be made. I know that there are companies that do. I also know that there are companies that will record the phone calls with the consent of the client, but not necessarily the consent of the person that's being called, obviously, because they don't know that they're being called. So it just kind of depends on the amount of risk that the testing company is prepared to assume on that side of things. But my personal feeling is that it's not worth taking the risk. And luckily for me, Bishop Fox and our legal team agree. So I don't get put in any difficult situations.
That's good. That's good that your company agrees because that would be a problem if they're like
Yeah.
your company's like, nah, go ahead
No,
and do
you're
it, and you're
doing
like, I
it.
don't think we
Just go.
should. So
Yeah.
that's a good point that you make there. So in your keynote, you emphasize how easy it is to mislead people's perception, especially when deepfakes are involved. What ethical red lines have you drawn for yourself when using emotional manipulation and engagement? So I know you talk about like fear and coercion. Yeah, coercion. I can't say the word coercion.
Coercion. Yes.
Coercion. Yes. Uh, but what are some other red lines, or yeah, some other lines that you've drawn that you just want to
Yeah.
cross?
So I would say typically the way that I look at it is if I have to press somebody into that frame of mind where they are triggered into an emotionally heightened state, then I'm doing a bad job. and I'm not acting in a way that is ethically okay. And if I have to push them to that point, then I'm not a good behavioral engineer. Um, that's it's a cheap parlor trick, in my opinion. Like, we talk about social engineering, we talk about manipulation, we talk about, bribery, coercion, fear-based pretexts. Those are all things that I see on kind of like the dark side of social engineering. And then on more of like the light side, if you'll go with me on that, like there's behavioral engineering and really like influence and building rapport and building trust and creating genuine relationships with people. And the type of work that we do is somewhere in the middle of that. And there is some gray area. There is some, dark side to what we're doing. But ultimately, at the end of the day, my goal is if this person who I am attempting to influence not to follow the company procedure and the policy, if I have to trigger them into a state of panic or fear that say they're going to lose their job or not get paid, or I have to push them to a point where, they think that they're going to get a large bonus or an incentive, or like I essentially have to bribe them to do something. I feel like that's cheating and it's a cheap tactic and I'm better than that. So I try to take a route that is more like benign and neutral, where I'm still testing whether or not they're following the procedure, but I'm so subtle in my behavioral engineering tactics that I don't even trigger that emotional response. So my goal is for them to feel like everything is okay and this is fine. Everything is normal and it's just another day. And the goal is for them to not enforce the policy because they just like me so darn much. Really, that's it. And so that tests whether or not they're willing to enforce the policy. It satisfies the goal of the test. And we don't put anyone in a situation where they're going to feel terrible after the fact and make an enemy out of the security team and be completely unreceptive to the correction that will come following that error. Because we want them to learn from this. We don't want them to immediately put a wall up and become defensive and feel like they've been tricked and be embarrassed and want to die. And I mean, there are people who will go to extremes if they feel embarrassed or targeted or humiliated. And so that is absolutely not my goal. The goal is not for me just to win. The goal is for me to test the organization, to get a solid understanding of whether or not they have good security controls in place, their people are aware and able to follow procedure and enforce those policies and procedures, and to do all of that without using the cheap, easy, manipulative tactics to do so.
Yeah, that reminds me of it was I feel like it was a couple years ago at this point, but and you probably know the company, but there was some company that sent out a phishing email to all the companies with a holiday bonus.
Yep.
You probably know what I'm talking about.
Yep.
And everyone was in an uproar. I'm like, oh my
Yep.
gosh.
It
To
was
be
a
honest with you,
very huge misstep, in my opinion.
when I first heard that, I was like, I don't really see what the big deal is. Like a real threat actor would do something like that, but then like after hearing you talk and hearing the uproar about it, I'm like, okay, I can understand why that is a area that you do not want to go into. So, but yeah, so that's really good that you mentioned that for people who are listening and watching that want to get into this, because yeah, it's definitely a fine line that you have to walk, and
It's a
I
tough
feel like it can be
balance.
hard because there's a lot of gray area.
Yeah, it's a tough balance, but at the end of the day, I think as you mature in this role, you start to see that the goal isn't necessarily winning, which sounds insane when you're like, but that's the job is to win, right? Sometimes, sometimes it isn't necessarily that. It just kind of depends on the goals of the client. And every project is a little bit different. Um, I recently had a tabletop where the whole goal of a tabletop is to validate the incident response plan, and they didn't have one. So they probably shouldn't have even purchased a tabletop, if we're being honest. But I took the approach of, we're going to build the airplane while we're flying it. And by the end of the tabletop, they were like, we should probably have a solid plan with like policies and procedures in place here. And I swear I do more social engineering during a tabletop than actually like social engineering engagements because I had to lead this group through 5 or 6 hours of a tabletop to come to this conclusion on their own, take ownership of that decision, and then commit to doing the thing without being that jerk that just comes in and says, like, here's all the mistakes you're making and this is what you should do. Like, that's not how you approach this. So I think if you want to be a fantastic social engineer, the things that you really need to focus on are learning excellent leadership skills and building trust and rapport and fantastic communication skills. And like the rest just kind of comes naturally.
Yeah. Thanks for unpacking that. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. So here's the last question. Alethe, do you have any additional cybersecurity hot takes or hidden wisdom you would like to share?
I would say the number one question I get is how do I get a job in cybersecurity? And that is almost impossible for me to answer for everybody because there are infinite possibilities in information security for jobs. So, my best advice is if you find a role that you think sounds interesting, the best thing to do is to go look through job descriptions for that role, look at the responsibilities and the requirements for that role, and then figure out what the gaps are in your experience, in your certifications, in your education, and then start targeting closing those gaps. But the most important point that I can share with you is to network with humans. Start going to conferences, start meeting people in your communities, start meeting people in the industry because those relationships will open the doors to job opportunities in the future. And you never know what will happen in the next 6 months, a year, 5 years. I've gotten every single job that I have landed in the last decade through relationships with people, not just submitting a resume cold. So that's probably my best advice I can share.
Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, I totally agree with you there. Alethe, thank you so much for being on the show. Where can the audience connect with you if they want to get a hold of you?
Best place to find me and connect with me is on LinkedIn. That's probably the place that I check the most. I'm still on X, formerly known as Twitter, and Instagram. I just shared pictures of my chickens. But if you're into that, by all means, reach out.
And audience, the best place to reach me is just drop a YouTube comment. I reply to all my YouTube comments. My LinkedIn inbox is getting filled, and I check my YouTube comments more than my LinkedIn inbox. So the best way to get a hold of me is actually my YouTube comments. So drop a comment. Let me know what you thought of the show. Alethe, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
Audience, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Hopefully, I see you on the next episode. Until then, this is Kyser signing off.